Great. So welcome to our current students and our past two students here today. We are hosting our second annual alumni conversation and at the School of Landscape Architecture, or the program of Landscape Architecture at the College of Architecture and Environmental Design. Today's event is going to be casual and conversational. We have with us two guests that Professor Frederick will be introducing in a moment. We're first going to be listening to a presentation from our guests. So if you can turn off your camera and your microphone, and you can post questions as you think of them in the chat. And then after their presentation, we can all turn on our microphones and cameras and entertain the chat or talk live with each other, depending upon how many more guests we have visit in this conversation today. So with that, Charles, if you would like to introduce our guests.
Yeah, but you still want me to do the mission and all that first, right?
Yes, we'll have that recorded. That'd be great. Thank you.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we see ourselves as a program, how we try to relate to our wider community and let everybody know what the value of landscape architecture here at Kent State is. So our mission very broadly is to educate and prepare students to have active and creative professions in landscape architecture through inclusive and interdisciplinary design methodologies and community engagement. Our vision is to be change agents whose commitment to learning fosters thinking and making our society better. I feel both of these, our mission and our vision, comes out clearly, hopefully clearly, in our coursework, especially our studios, and then the other projects that we choose to pursue academically and maybe through community engagement. Our focus is developing highly capable landscape architects with the distinction of having global awareness built on the understanding of the unique assets of our region and the city of Cleveland. We're fortunate enough to be in the city and call this our campus. We're also fortunate to have two other sister programs with us. Excuse me, my light just went out. I'll just keep going. In urban design and architecture. Also very fortunate to have the CUDC located here that we try to engage with as much as possible. What we try to do in this city, in our region, is to focus upon industrial placing, learn about hydrology and the Great Lakes watershed, and to look upon the urban landscapes as a unique living landscape and laboratory for us. We have broad goals to generate and instill professional knowledge, and the production of this knowledge is something that we want to be a shared experience between the faculty and students. We want to disseminate this information to the broader community. And what we're assuming here is that our students will become leaders in the profession. And what this really requires is the ability to research the issues within our changing profession and to look upon how our society is changing and be ready for that. And lastly, we look to preserve and expand the knowledge of our profession. We feel that we have a responsibility to preserve our accumulated knowledge and to make this available for the public's use as much as possible. And we do this through our coursework, through our community engagement, and through presentations to the general public. So within that, this is how we base a lot of our decisions on how we're going to conduct ourselves as a program. And what we hope to show today is how two of our students have looked upon our foundation and have continued with their experience and journey in landscape architecture. So to begin with, I'd like to introduce Katie Keller.
Hey, Charles.
Yes.
Mark,
how are you?
Do you and Kat mind if I just jump in for a little bit, because I've got to jump back out again? Is that
No,
okay?
please, Mark, that's fine.
Great. Thanks, everybody. It's good to see you. I was glad to be up at reviews last week and look forward to a reception coming up next Monday. So be there for that. It should be fun. I'm the dean of the college, if you're a guest here today, and I'm so excited about the landscape architecture program, what the leadership, Charles, who was instrumental in founding the program, and Kat Marshall, who is directing the program currently, are doing an excellent job. And we've got a great cohort of students this semester. I'm really excited about it. And that mission statement is an exceptional one. And it's really important. And, you know, some mission statements are slogans, but we mean it. And I say that because right now out there, you know, we're in a realm where there's a lot of talk about landscape urbanism and ecological urbanism and combinant urbanism and recombinant urbanism and all of these things, you know, but what it really comes down to is that we live in a fragmented society of autonomous buildings that are just floating around and disconnected. And the capacity of the landscape to re-knit these together and to make places for people that consider the environment in very rich ways is very real. And I think we're uniquely situated with the CUDC in downtown Cleveland, with the Urban Design Masters program right there, to do some really, really exceptional and extraordinary things. So I am super high on this program and very, very excited about it. And I just wanted to say, you know, this is a great event. I'm glad you are hosting it tonight, and I look forward to seeing those of you who can be there next Monday. So thank you for giving me a little bit of stage time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. So what I'd like to do now is introduce two of our recent graduates who are both working regionally here, and to have them talk about what they've done since graduation and maybe some things that they would advise our students and anybody else who's listening in to kind of think about as they continue their journey in landscape architecture. So first we have Katie, who graduated in 2019, and she recently moved out to Columbus, Ohio, and is working with MKSK, really a great firm out of the Columbus area. And also Maci Nelson, who's a 2020 graduate from our program, recently moved back to Cleveland. She was out in the Southeast doing some work. She has founded a podcast, The Landscape Nerd, and works for a local firm, Diru Landscape Architecture here in Cleveland. So Katie and Maci, can you begin with a little bit more of a description or you know, just to begin your presentation on how you've continued your journey.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Maci Nelson, and as Charles said, I graduated May 2020, and then I moved out to Reno, Nevada. So it was a big difference, but I think the success that I saw out there is a testament to how the program actually was very great at laying the foundation that you can take this information with you anywhere. So I'm going to give a little bit of a brief history of the work I'm doing, or I did back in Reno, and then also talk about the podcast. So getting two different sides of my take on the landscape architecture field. So I'm going to share my screen. And okay, can everyone see? Okay, great. So I wanted to start off with me as a landscape designer in the traditional sense that you know, work for a firm, and the firm that I worked for was actually a design build, more so a landscape contractor. So they also did a lot of maintenance for landscapes, and primarily at the residential scale. And so here, what I learned was how quickly the residential scale and design build process can be. So I drew this first plan at the top right here. and it was built within 2 months. And I was super overjoyed because I didn't think that was going to happen that quickly. And I was very proud of, like a first build. And because it's in this residential scale, a lot of the things that I work with are with plant palettes and picking very resilient plants and plants that can also be sourced. You look at renovations and like, how do you remove landscape elements properly and safely? And then very importantly, like construction details, because these products are getting built so quickly that you're working directly with the installers. So I learned a lot about how you actually lay down pavers and how do you build a wall and how do you build a trench and create drainage appropriately. And then lastly, one of the bigger things that I'm dealing with now are like permits and homeowner associations and looking at other parameters that come with real life work that are, they're parameters and they're conditions that you don't necessarily have when you're in a studio environment. So it's learning how to apply the ideas that you have into a real world setting. And I started working pretty much right out of school. I had secured employment with them. And it was at first as a freelance worker. And then the relationship progressed to being full-time work, but I was able to work remotely. So I actually still work remotely for them, as well as working with the local firm in Cleveland. And then the podcast, which is probably the the one that I think is the other job that I have that is extremely interesting and is a big part of that outreach that Charles had touched upon with the mission. It's not just about educating us to be competent and good landscape designers and architects. It's also about creating leadership, and it's about getting the knowledge about landscape architecture to the world. It's not just about an secular thought. So yes, we can talk to other landscape architects and that's awesome, but what we really need to do is advocate for the profession and start talking to people outside of our industry. And so the podcast is really a form of activism and education. And the podcast is about telling stories of landscape and landscape design and overall storytelling. So taking this media that is audio and helping use that to convey landscape architecture to a wider audience. And I cover a lot of different topics like history, and I do focus on interdisciplinary work too, and then also representation and art and how we convey these design ideas that we have to the world. And I began that work in 2020, the beginning of 2020, and it started off just as a kind of hobby project, and then it slowly picked up, and now I get about 100 listens a week, and I have around 25 episodes, and I have listeners from all over the world, and that's really great. And I get messages, and I have interviews with people from all over the world, and it's a great way to network. To look at sort of the differences of what I cover in each work. So just to stay with the podcast, this is just an example of all the different topics and a different set of skills that's involved with this kind of work. It's outreach and it's about communication, and you definitely learn that in the program because we do have a lot of civic engagement, and we take real sites and we go visit them, and we're able to understand what needs to happen there. And then sometimes we're talking to community leaders about that. So that's definitely a skill that I gained and was able to translate into the podcast so that I know how to speak to a wider audience and not just to your, the professor or your classmate and even like your boss. And then back to like the traditional, design drawings and construction drawings. These are a few examples of this residential scale work and how it's so important to learn how to draw and actually communicate the designs in order for them to get built. So I feel like my experience after school, I tried to do everything. I tried to incorporate as much as I could and kind of have a proof of concept, you know, saying like, I knew that what we are learning and this profession is so impactful to the world and the built environment. I need other people to know this, but I also need to, you know, see that I can build things and see that what I built is successful and is operating. So yeah, that is what I think I'll cover for my presentation. So if you have any questions, I know we're gonna wait till after Katie presents, but this is just a quick overview of the work I've been doing since graduation.
Thank you, Maci. We will wait till after both presentations for questions. So Katie, why don't you introduce yourself and show us some of your recent work, please?
Hi, everybody. I'm Katie. I think I've met most of you guys before. Like Charles said, I graduated in 2019. After graduation, well, I guess I'll even start before then. When I was in school, I was interning with Environmental Design Group, which I think has really, even still to this day, been very helpful in, you know, getting me set with my CAD skills and, you know, working in an office and all that sort of stuff that translates for the rest of your career. And then after graduation, I wanted to try something differently. So I went into high-end residential work in the Cleveland area, mostly on the east side, which was a really good experience. I think I got exposure to a lot of things that I wasn't getting at Environmental Design Group, which is exactly what I wanted. But I always kind of knew that I wanted to get out of Cleveland, but not too far, obviously. So I winded up in Columbus and at MKSK. So I've been with MKSK since March of 2020, which is obviously a really interesting time to start a job because that's when the pandemic really went crazy. So that was interesting. I started that job actually my first day starting at MKSK was the first day that everyone in the office worked from home. So I went in, grabbed a laptop, met a couple people, signed some paperwork, and then was back home. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting, but I really enjoy all the work that I'm doing there and I'm learning a ton, and it's a really nice environment that's collaborative and, you know, it's great. All right, I'll share my screen. So this is just one project that I've been working on recently. It's called Taylor Farm. We're calling it Taylor Farm Park. So this is a 93-ish acre former farm. And you can see, so this image was taken in August of 2020. So you can see where all of the production was happening on the farm. And then this is their homestead. So there's a house tucked in here in the tree.
I think she just lost internet. She had told me it was
Yeah.
a little bit of an issue before.
Okay, well, let's give her a moment, and if she doesn't come right back on, then maybe we'll allow some questions for you, Maci.
Okay.
So let's give her like 30 or so seconds. The great thing of technology, right? You could meet anywhere, but sometimes you can't. All right. So not seeing her. Okay. All right. Let's get a question for Maci here until Katie jumps on back on board. Anybody from our current students have a question?
Yeah. I see one in the chat. Am I allowed to just read it from this chat if I see it?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't pay attention to that, so.
Yeah, so they asked, I think everyone can see the technology question. So the programs that I found most useful were definitely the rendering programs and AutoCAD and GIS. Those are probably my top three. So AutoCAD, I honestly wish I would have studied it more in school, so I had a leg up when leaving, but when working, you use it so much that I pretty much learned everything I need to learn within like the first couple of months. Yeah, GIS I think is incredibly useful, even if whoever you work for, like my firm doesn't necessarily use GIS. I use it on my own, and I use the tools from like Google Earth as a way to like as like a middle ground for anybody who I'm working with, right? Like even if they don't know what GIS is, you do. So you can use that as a starting point for a lot of communications. And the rendering softwares like Photoshop and Illustrator, those, and I love to do hand drawings, but the ability to scan those in and scale them up, those things are like invaluable. So I would say choose your rendering programs. Yes, it'd be great to know all of them, but like choose how to master like whichever ones you want that you work well with, and you kind of have that in your back pocket always. Let's see the next one. Favorite podcast episode. Oh my gosh. The favorite podcast episode that I've ever recorded, there's too many. There's not going to be like a single one. I definitely enjoy a lot of the history oriented ones just because I get to do like a deep dive. So the African American Gardens one was probably one of my favorites because it was one, the most like well received, like so many people have listened to that episode. Oh, Katie's back. I'll answer these last two questions and then Katie can come back. And then also any of the interdisciplinary episodes, like the interview ones are pretty good because you just get to get outside of your own head, and it's good to hear from outside of landscape architecture because while we know how awesome it is, we don't know how other people view us a lot of times, and it's really good to get that. And then Aya asked, do you think there's a lot of limits with clients comparing to school and then applying ideas? I would say it isn't always just the client, it's also where you're building, because a client might actually have an idea that's right on par with you, but if the city doesn't allow it, if if it's not ecologically sound, you're gonna, I think in general, anytime there's a real world project, you're going to have way more limitations than you did in school, which is why school, it's really good to flex that muscle so you can be creative and problem solve in really like fun and creative, functional ways. So, like don't worry about the limits as much right now, like you need to have them, but I would say like in the real world, there's so many different laws and permits and things like that that you need, that it's more important to be creative to solve that.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to the podcast question? What got you interested in doing that?
Oh, so first of all, it was actually from the fellowship, the travel fellowship with Kent State. When I was awarded the fellowship, I was able to go out to the Sierras of Reno, Nevada area to do some studying. And the problem that I was coming across was my own biases and what I thought was like looked good or what I thought landscape was. And I was trying to figure out, how do I convey these everyday kind of regional settings? Like, yes, the Sierra Mountains are amazing, but also like people live here, and there's just, you know, like different topology, and there's different different typologies, and like the topography is different, and like there's a lot of rock and there's not a lot of green, especially compared to here. And I was seeing a lot of designs out there mimicking the same imagery and looks that we have in Northeast Ohio. So I was like, how do you make landscapes sound beautiful to those who have no idea? Like they have no reference point. And that's when I started to explore telling a story about landscape, and then it developed into finding out so many cool things. And also, I love to talk, so having a place where no one could interrupt me, I guess, while I'm talking was also appealing. But I saw it as a really interesting opportunity to highlight the details of what landscape architects see to a wider audience, to like give places value. So that's really how I got into it.
And I think it's a really natural progression from anybody in a design discipline, but especially landscape architecture, because we try so hard to understand that place that we're trying to know more about, and either make a proposal that really fits within a cultural and natural history, of the place, or describe something new and why we think it's appropriate. So that thing, and you've heard it from both Kat and I before. Your design has to tell a story,
Right?
And you got to go from the very most important condition of how the landscape was formed, to how you've seen more recent events, and then why is your next chapter, your new design, relevant to this story right now. So I see it as really quite relevant for us. All right, so let's see if Katie is a co-host again. And I think Kat has to do that.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Here, let me see if I can do it. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm gonna keep my video off, hoping that my internet likes it better. And I don't know where I got cut off. So I'll just start from the beginning. So this is one project that I've been working on a lot recently. This is in New Albany, Ohio, which is a very affluent suburb, just northeast of downtown Columbus. A lot of the work actually that I've been doing at MKSK has been in New Albany. We kind of have a very interesting, and I think I would call it, rare kind of relationship with the city. We have like a contractual kind of relationship with them, where we do like all of their design services. Anytime there's development happening in the city, it kind of goes through us to make sure that it, is aesthetically and, safely, appropriate for the city. They have like very, very high design standards here. So yeah, it's interesting. So if you guys can see my cursor, so we're kind of right on the border of New Albany, the western border of New Albany. So this site is about 93 acres. It used to be a farm. As you can tell, this was taken in August 2020. Sorry if I'm repeating myself. This is what we refer to as the homestead. So tucked in these trees over here is the home that the family used to live in, the Taylor family. We also have a barn that's not in great shape. We have a chicken coop and some other kind of smaller buildings on the site. So the city, with all of the development that they've been, going through over the past few decades, they've destroyed a lot of wetlands, surprise, surprise. So they have a lot of wetland banking that they need to do. So this was kind of like the perfect site for them to do that. So this is, the plan is to turn this into a really big wetland park that's going to have trails, boardwalks, overlooks, etc. And the idea with this homestead is that this is going to be a destination for people to host, like large events like weddings or conferences. The city is also looking at this existing house, trying to get that cleaned up a little bit and maybe have their like parks department located here. So this whole project is going to be broken down into several phases, and this phase 1 that I've been working on is just all about the trails and boardwalk and stuff like that. Let's see. Can I click here? So here's a couple site photos. It's like very, very large and open and hot when you're there. And like I mentioned before, which maybe you didn't hear, but we have just to the north, we have this very busy, loud highway. We have this busy, 35-mile-an-hour road. We also have this like very ugly utility easement transmission line that goes through the site. So the way that I kind of see the site is that we have a lot of challenges to work through, but it's also like, in a lot of ways, it's like a blank slate, I guess. It's also very flat and wet. You can see the utility lines right there. Here are some images of the buildings falling apart on the site. Here's the house that I mentioned, looking at putting the Parks Department in there, maybe inside the barn. This is a recent plan that we've done. So we have, it's broken up into 3 big wetland cells. This is wetland cell 1, 2, 3, and we also have this lime green line, which is the covenant boundary. And what that is, it's part of like an EPA restriction on like material choices, the planting that you do in there, the grading that you do in there. It's kind of like a long, long list of restrictions that you're allowed to do within that boundary. And you can imagine that's like, it's our entire site. So we've been kind of constrained. We've had a lot of constraints with like almost everything we want to do. So within this boundary, you're not allowed to have impervious surfaces. You're not allowed to grade within the site. You're only allowed to have a 3-foot mow strip on either side of your trail. This easement going right through the site, you're not allowed to plant any trees in there. We also have restrictions on how much boardwalk we're allowed to have on the site, but the boardwalk is, necessary in a lot of places to get around, as you can see. So lots of challenges. These next few slides, they're I just like chose random different things of like, exercises and studies that we went through throughout this project and are still continuing to do. So we have this big circular form right in the center of the park that we want to have, relate to the homestead and the, like ceremony garden that we're planning for in a later phase. Looking at the length of the boardwalk, what that looks like in terms of like the square footage, in terms of pricing, like how can we incorporate that with like mounding outside of the covenant, et cetera, et cetera. Other studies looking at the material of the boardwalk that we're going to use and what that means for price and longevity of the product. These are really quick studies of putting structures on the boardwalk. Another thing I didn't mention about this project, we're trying to have a focus on the habitat there of like, birds, bats, and whatever else wants to live there. So trying to create structures that also function as bird blinds. This was a study that I did of, so this road is that road that was on the southern portion that I mentioned was really loud and busy. So, do we tuck a path inside the trail? Is it like a hybrid where it goes in and out so it feels more public than having it just inside? Is it just on the outside and then it comes back in later on? Looked at different studies of this layout of the homestead, and like I mentioned, this is going to be happening at a later phase, but we are trying to have like some, finite understanding of what this wants to be, because we don't want to go back and regret, us putting the parking in the wrong place or putting trailheads in the wrong place, or et cetera, et cetera. This was a quick exercise looking at the planting on the site. So I had a lot of fun doing this. So looking at, like natural groupings of plants, like maple and beech trees together and oaks and hickories together, and thinking about like the habitat that they provide, looking at like screening opportunities along the residential areas, taking advantage of the saturation, all the saturation that we're going to have on site, and put some bald cypresses in there and the grove, all those sorts of things. And then this was taken in September of this year, so you can see the engineers have already gone in and started doing some of the grading to these wetlands in here. All of these things are their vernal pools or the emergent wetlands, so they're going to have standing water most of the year. So that's it.
Well, thanks, Katie. I really enjoyed seeing the drawing touch, especially teaching the construction class and now teaching a plants class, and then hearing words like emergent and vernal pool and the habitat types and things like that. And it brings a little bit of a tear in my eye to know that you guys are advancing and doing the right thing. It feels great. It really feels great. So while you were gone, we had Maci answer a couple questions. So we'd, I guess right now, yeah, it up to any conversation we'd like to have, correct?
Yeah, and I think since the crowd here is manageable, if you want to raise a hand, and then we can turn on cameras and just have a conversation rather than typing in the chat. So if there's any questions. Kayleen, I see you have a hand up. Yes, go ahead, Kayleen.
Yeah.
Yep. That maybe she's not. Kayleen, are you able to unmute yourself?
I see a button that says ask to unmute, which makes me think that maybe you have to unmute her.
I have.
Oh.
I see her hand, lower hand.
I know, it's like I see your hand too.
No, I can't get it to unmute for some reason.
Oh, security stuff. Oh, I've definitely seen that before.
Let's see here.
Maybe she can type her question.
Okay, that's true. Anyone else while we're waiting for Kayleen?
I can ask a question. Katie, I really enjoyed, it seems like that's kind of a big scale project. I was gonna ask, like, what's the typical kind of scale? I don't know if you guys do residential or if it's kind of mostly larger scale kind of planning projects.
Yeah, good question. So MKSK doesn't really do, like single family home residential stuff, but we do kind of like specialize in like new developments of like, like townhomes and apartment blocks and those sorts of things. The only residential project that I've worked on is actually up in Cleveland. So Van Aken, they're doing a phase 2, which includes a big residential tower. So I've been on that team designing their outdoor space, which is really cool. It's like a really fancy pool. The owner is really interested in having like an arboretum feel to the space, which is interesting. So it butts up right against a golf course. So we're trying to kind of like share the, the viewscape there while including our own kind of, tree design. But yeah, like I said, I do a ton of stuff in New Albany, and a lot of the stuff I guess I would say that I've been doing has been around like public spaces with playgrounds or, like trails and these sorts of things. The scale varies. I've done some pretty tiny little itty bitty playgrounds. This is definitely the largest scale project I've worked on. it's interesting. I mean, yeah, I mean, even just looking at like the details and all the other kind of like construction stuff, that it varies so widely what I've seen just because of the scale. We haven't gotten into like full-on construction documentation for this project, but it's going to be very minimal compared to what I've done for other projects. So it's a lot of like, what's the detail when you transition from pervious asphalt to impervious asphalt, or, the boardwalk details, or, even just like the planting. I think the planting has the chance to have like a pretty big impact and story on the site too. So that's been a big consideration, which is not always the case. So yeah, it's kind of all over the place. Yeah. In edible green spaces. No, I haven't. Do you mean like gardens?
I wonder if you think like those urban edible forests that have been
Urban farms.
Oh, urban farms.
So MKSK has about 100 people that work at the firm, and we're kind of broken up into different teams. So I don't always see what other people are working on, but we do every Monday morning when we have, like our company meetings, we do a share the story where, we kind of get people introduced to some of the cool stuff that other teams are working on. And I did see one project in the Columbus area. I think it was tied to, I don't know if it was like a halfway house or something that was more kind of, like ingrained in the community, like a big community garden. I hate to say it, I don't think that the aesthetic in New Albany would really allow for a community garden, just because they like having such pristine, like clean landscapes. So yeah, good question. I mean, I would love to see that, but I don't know.
As a follow-up to you mentioning doing smaller projects and the images that you provided for social media of the playground, it's behind me. I don't know if you want to speak about that particular project at all, or something similar scale.
Sure. Yeah. So this project is based in Columbus. So it's called YWCA. So this building has women and children that come and stay for temporary, and the playground is already existing. So we were kind of going in to just revamp it all. And you can kind of see it's got like weird wiggly concrete pavements, and the shape of that, playground was not our shape. So we were kind of constrained with the funding for this project. So we tried to keep as much as possible and just enhance it. So yeah, that's what that project was. We included a new sport court, that pergola. We reused some of their play equipment and their umbrellas, but we introduced some new stuff too. And this space was kind of broken down into different like age group areas. So we have, it's not really shown on the screen here, but we had a play space for much younger children on the side there. And then this was supposed to be for the older kids, the view that we can see right now. Yeah, playgrounds are really interesting. I've learned a lot with them, like the surfacing and the safety requirements that go along with it. And even just working with, the local reps or the nationwide reps that do, that have these products has been a good learning experience.
Great. I see, Kayleen, you've been able to rejoin us. I don't know if you are able to ask or if you want to type in the chat your question. We can't, You're breaking up.
Oh no, yeah, it's breaking up.
Hey, Kayleen, we can't understand for some reason. It sounds really far away and broken up. Can you type it in the chat maybe? While we're waiting for Kayleen, is there any other questions from current students? I have a question for both of you about what is it like in your work-life balance, a comparison for when you were in grad school versus now that you're out in your professional career and having a social life and families and so forth.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. In grad school, I definitely, as far as like work hours or hours you're putting into producing things, grad school is definitely a lot more than in like my work life. I'm able to balance a lot more because in a way, because of those parameters and limitations that Katie was also going through, you know exactly what you have to do, versus in grad school, you're spending that time investigating a lot more and you're experimenting and flexing your ideas and trying to flesh them out. And so you have to give yourself time to do that. However, I will say, like, it wasn't always, it definitely wasn't easy, you know, understanding that you don't need to have all the answers, but you still have to give yourself the time was probably the most like difficult thing to do. But it was definitely worth it because I feel like when you're able to know that you've thought through a lot of scenarios in your mind and you've like practiced them either graphically or even if it is just a mental exercise, that stays with you and you take it with you, and it makes the conversation around your design a lot more robust and you become more confident in what you're doing because you gave yourself that time to like think through scenarios.
You know, I don't really know how to answer this. There's definitely a difference. I think I would say with work, it's easier to like close the door and like say that you're done for the day. Whereas in, you know, grad school, it was hard to do that because I felt like, you know, in grad school, it's all kind of like made up work, meaning you can kind of like explore as much as you want to or produce as much as you want to. And, you know, it's just about getting ideas out. And there's no limit to that. I would say that's the biggest difference. I would say I have more of a social life these days. More time.
Yeah, I mean, although granted, like in grad school, the people around you became like Katie and I became such great friends because we were always together.
Always.
You know? Okay, and Kat had mentioned family life. So I have a young son, he's 4. So he was only 10 weeks old when I entered the program. And he ended up growing up with these really awesome aunts and uncles who are landscape, you know, designers and architects. And that it was also hard to like balance, but knowing that other people right around you are in the same boat is what made it a lot, like made it, you know, like that's how I made it through, was like having support with your studio mates, you know.
Yeah. This wasn't necessarily part of your question, but if I could look back and tell my young self that was starting the program, I would tell myself to be more confident in like producing and just getting ideas out there. I think when I was in school, I didn't like fully, I guess in a broad sense, I just like did not know what the heck I was doing half the time. You know what I mean? and there was insecurity about like what I was doing, and I didn't want to like spend a bunch of time on something that didn't make any sense, and blah, blah, how that goes. So, but the reality is that that doesn't exactly change. Like some of the stuff that I wanted to show in my quick presentation was to show like, you're constantly doing studies, you're constantly trying to figure out what works, you're always like making different iterations, everything's always changing and developing and growing, and that's very much what school is like. And I think now that I'm in the real world, I'm like, oh, okay, like I get it. I wish I did that a little bit more in school. So that's my 2 cents about that.
That's
We have more
great.
questions.
There's a couple questions in the chat. Aya has one first for you, Katie. What made you decide to go to Columbus instead of staying in Cleveland?
Yeah, good question. I was born and raised in Cleveland, and I think just in general, it was time for me to do something new. And also, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to people. I think that there's just like more job opportunity in Columbus or outside of Cleveland, just in general. And I think that is due to the fact that there hasn't really been a landscape architecture program in Cleveland, and Columbus has had one with Ohio State for, who knows how long. So there's just like more stuff happening down here. There's just a larger landscape architecture communities down here. So yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I was doing residential stuff in Cleveland, which there is a lot of work in that, but I wanted to kind of get back to my roots of wanting to do, public work, and also just continuing to grow my knowledge at a, different scale. So that's really the biggest reason. And yeah, it's nice to be away from Cleveland, but not too far away, I will say. But Cleveland is great. Sorry, I'll be back one day.
We'd love to have you back. So Aya's second question is to Maci. If you can talk about the award of the case study that took you to work in the field. I'm assuming she's referencing what you mentioned from while you were a grad student.
Yeah.
If you could talk more about that.
Sure. Yeah. So Kent State, I think they're still doing it, the travel fellowship. And so you apply and you make a proposal for travel to a location to kind of create your own study and explore some of the more interesting things within your field. And that is opened up to the entire college and the architecture college. So for me, the proposal I was making was to understand a very different landscape and then learning how to find the bridges between like what we see in Northeast Ohio or what practices, and especially with climate change, looking at what a potentially drier or wetter area would look like, and in the terms of landscape architecture, what's being done about it. Like, is anyone looking towards that? And so my proposal was to go out to the Sierras and look at, this higher elevation and this drier climate and see what they're doing design wise, and see if we should be incorporating any of that into our designs as we move forward. And unfortunately, with climate change being as progressing as quickly as it is, and understanding what that could mean. So that was from the college. So that was from Kent State, and I spent all entire summer out there. And I was able to meet with a lot of local landscape architects and contractors and really get some insight into the area and just also get to know a lot about the plants. So that is, that's where that came from. I hope that answers your question, Aya. Like there's a whole application process, I should say. Like they put out the emails and announcements. So if you're interested.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could just jump in and say that program is available to the whole college. We fund 3 or 4 students each year. I think it's at a level of $5,000. I'm not sure. I may have to check on that. But we've had students go to Indonesia. We've had students go to northern Canada and work with the Inuits. We've had Maci go to the dry climates in the US. We've had people go to, where else? We've had people in Italy. And it's just been an exceptional program that's really helped students to Scandinavia. A couple of students have gone there, and they explore something, and the expectation is they come back and teach us in the college something about what they've explored and done. So.
Thank you, Mark, for clarifying that. That's great. Yes, I think the deadlines for that are in the spring. I could be wrong. So you can start thinking about if you want to travel, and hopefully things will be opening up even more for allowing travel to happen.
They will be. Actually, we've awarded a number that are backlogged, so there's going to be a lot of travel coming up.
Oh, good.
And we will be announcing it in November. And yes, they're usually due around the beginning of February.
Okay, great. So, and they're also open to the faculty. So faculty have done and expanded their own research with this opportunity of having support to travel, to go to archives, visit other professional offices, and so forth. So that's great. And we're almost at the end of our time. I don't know if there's one final question that anyone might have that's burning. No? I have a final one. What is your favorite landscape to visit? Maci, go.
It's
Don't
gotta
think
be
too hard.
No, it's just like it's always going to be any riverine or like riparian area.
Okay.
Always, like I love seeing the exposed, like whatever stone we have, like just seeing how the water's worked its way through it and trying to like walk it hands down my favorite.
Awesome. Katie.
Wow, that's a good answer, Maci. This is fresh in my mind. I was just in Detroit this weekend and I went to Belle Isle and saw the Pete Udoff garden that's there. And I've always been a huge fan of him. I think just like gardens in general that have like a very interesting planting design, I think I have a new like love and appreciation for them. So that's my answer.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks for putting together your presentations and spending an hour with us. This has been a really fun time getting to see what you're doing and what you've been up to since you've departed as a student and entered the great horde of alumni from our college. So thank you. Thank you, Charles, for introducing and for conducting this evening's little conversation, and to the students for your attendance. I hope that we can do this again soon. And for the dean had mentioned that there's a reception this coming Monday that is for alumni and friends. If you're an alumni, you should have received an invitation. It's here
And
in
students.
Oh, and students. Oh, great. Okay. I didn't know when to.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Perfect. So we should all just mosey down to the convention center at the end of studio on Monday and have a soiree.
We would love to have you there. But we're also going to have a reception at the CUDC. When is that?
Yes. November 1st.
I think that's scheduled as well. So we're going to,
Yes. So we have some events and we would love, Maci, for you to come since you're local, and Katie, if you're in town on those dates, I hope you can join us.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Maci. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Mark, for
Bye-bye.
coming. Great. Watching everyone depart. Okay. Miriam must have walked away.
We could remove her.
Yeah, I'm gonna remove her. I guess. Remove. Okay.
All right.
That was good. I'm not sure if they're so
Yeah,
excited
it's a-
about their work. 'Cause they weren't very charismatic in their presentations, but
Well, it's tough to know, what
Yeah.
they do for things.
yeah.
It was Kayleen, did she like go back home or something?